Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing a reaction video today on a Leo longevity video, and this is his video on how to microdose magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. Now, I want to mention that I've actually been following this protocol for like 9 months or so, maybe 10, somewhere around that. So I have been taking microdosing magic mushrooms every day for the past 9 or 10 months. And I gotta say, I have had amazing results. I feel incredible. It has changed my outlook on life. I have more, motivation, determination to get my goals done, achieve the things that I want to achieve, and I attribute it, not all of it, but some of that to the microdosing that I've been doing and that I learned from Leo. So I'm hoping that in this video, I can help break down his video, which is very dense, and make it a little bit more, understandable for just your average person, right? So I'm going to let him do some explaining, and let's go to the video right now. Let's check this out.
Chronologically, so you'll be able to find the videos that are relevant to you through the playlist. First, what are magic mushrooms? Magic mushrooms are mushrooms, fungi that have unusual chemicals that cause psychedelic effects in us. The two main chemicals that do that are psilocybin and its metabolite psilocin. But there are many other chemicals in mushrooms that have psychedelic effects, which makes each of the mushrooms slightly different. The most important chemical to the mechanisms of magic mushrooms is psilocybin. Or psilocin, the metabolite, which acts somewhat similarly. To fully understand how psilocybin works, you have to.
A lot of people don't even understand. A lot of people don't even understand how mushrooms work, and it's crazy. They take them without really understanding how it works at all. But what he's getting into here is basically the basic mechanics. I'm just going to explain it for you. He's saying psilocybin affects your serotonin system in the brain. When you take psilocybin, it affects your serotonin receptors.
We won't get into that too much here, but just note that I have a series called the Serotonergic series. That series is the most comprehensive video series ever done on the serotonin system. If you watch it from the beginning to the end, you'll know more about serotonin than your psychiatrist does. But for now, I just want to alert you to the basic mechanisms of magic mushrooms, which I'll call psilocybin mushrooms from now on. Psilocybin mushrooms agonize two receptors in the brain that are very important. They're in the serotonin 2 series receptors. Those are 5-HT, which means serotonin, 2A and 2C. Those are the 2A and 2C series in the serotonin system.
Those are the two receptors that psilocybin, works on, whatever. When you take psilocybin, those two receptors are affected. They're agonized. So what's interesting about this, and what's different from magic mushrooms and something like an SSRI, which also works on the serotonin system, is that psilocybin only affects those two receptors, whereas an SSRI affects the entire serotonergic system in the brain, which is more than just two receptors. So this is really interesting. And in a lot of ways, it's a more like direct form of an SSRI. So Leo loves his SSRIs, but he'll even say in comparison studies, they've shown to be similarly effective. As in magic mushrooms, dosing everyday protocol is similarly effective to an SSRI. And what's also interesting about this is, let's say I forget to take my dose of magic mushrooms in the morning. I don't feel like shit. I'm like fine. I just don't wake up as quickly. Maybe I'm a little bit more tired that day, but it's not like I get sick or like feel terrible. So the withdrawal potential is not the same as SSRIs. I think that's important to mention.
What does that mean? That means psilocybin sort of acts like serotonin in your brain, but it acts like a selective kind of serotonin that doesn't bind to all of the serotonin receptors like the natural hormone does. Psilocybin binding to the 2A receptor is largely responsible for the acute hallucinogenic effects that people get when they trip, whereas its binding to the 2C receptor is largely responsible for its long-term effects when people microdose psilocybin. Next, what's tripping? Well, for those that don't know...
Interesting stuff, right? So, we're going to fast forward a little bit here. He has this really interesting part where he talks about things being natural and how there's this misconception of a lot of people believe that just because something's natural that it's good for you. And of course, this couldn't be farther from the truth. The example he uses is opioids. It's a great example. I mean, heroin is derived from a plant. It's from the poppy plant. So just because it's natural does not mean it's good. And, just because mushrooms are natural does not mean that they're healthy, right? Not everybody should microdose. And you should be microdosing for a reason, for a purpose. Like you're suffering from depression, lack of motivation, etc. Don't just do it like you're taking a vitamin or a supplement because you think it's good for you, because it's not. That's not what it's about. It's working on the serotonin system in the brain. You're literally, it's like taking a medication. So do it with a purpose. It's kind of his point here. And then he talks about it being magical. If it's magical or not, no, he says, and I agree, mushrooms are not magical. And he points out the magical thing is your serotonin system in the brain. That's what's magical, right? So then we're going to get in and talk about dopamine. I'm going to let him talk for a little bit here.
By which they cause these effects, and both in the short term and in the long term. The first thing is that they agonize the 5-HT2A receptors. The 2A receptors, when they're agonized, they cause dopamine transmission. That's why if you microdose psilocybin in the morning, you might feel more driven, ambitious, more energetic.
And you really do. But I will mention, the longer that you're on it, the more this effect you feel. So the first couple times you might not feel like that dopamine, motivation feeling, awake, alert, You might feel a little bit more anxiety actually in the beginning, and he'll get into why that is, and I'll follow up. But to get this effect, that like motivation, you really have to be consistent and take it for a long time. I notice it more now than I ever have before. And like I said, I've been doing this for like 9-10 months.
The dopamine transmission that's consequent to the serotonin system. By the way, very few people know about this. Very few people know that this drug causes direct dopamine transmission through the serotonin 2A series. In fact, the mushroom experts like Paul Stamets would be hard-pressed to tell you how it works.
I love Paul Stamets, but he is correct. Paul Stamets, in terms of his microdosing protocols, they just don't make sense.
To give you schedules of dosing, 4 on, 3 off of niacin, which is just ridiculous. Yeah. So how do psilocybin mushrooms exert their effects? Well, remember those serotonin 2A and 2C receptors. We're going to talk about them briefly. I'm going to tell you some things about them that even mushroom experts usually don't know. First, the 5-HT2A receptor, when it's agonized acutely, causes dopamine transmission. It also causes adrenaline transmission. This is called dopaminergic and adrenergic activity. That activity is actually responsible for the anxiety-inducing, called anxiogenic. Anxio is related to anxiety, and genic means producing something, increasing something. So the anxiogenic effect of psilocybin mushrooms, particularly the hero's doses, is exerted through the 2A receptor, which by the way...
So what he talks about, and what's interesting, and I've noticed as well, is that when you activate those receptors over and over again, they downregulate. And I've experienced way less anxiety at baseline, and I attribute that to those receptors being downregulated.
Serotonin receptors are not all calming. They have opposing effects depending on the individual receptors. And since psilocybin is selective, we have to talk about the individual receptors. Anyway, agonism of the 2A receptor causes acute dopamine transmission. That's why if you microdose psilocybin in the morning, you might find yourself more driven, more energetic, and a slightly better mood. This is kind of mild euphoria. But this is also the reason that people end up hallucinating and developing severe anxiety with hero's doses. It's that 2A receptor. So the acute effect is increasing dopaminergic and adrenergic activity in the brain. What's the chronic effect of the 2A receptor agonism for those that microdose? Well, I'll tell you, a lot of people have not thought about this properly before. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say what I'm about to say. But what happens acutely is that dopamine transmission exists. In the long term, the 2A receptor downregulates. In fact, to be honest with you, it downregulates even acutely, even from a single dose. It immediately downregulates the receptor. So if you microdose psilocybin continuously, what happens is the 2A receptor downregulates. Usually when the serotonin 2A receptor downregulates, so does the 2C receptor. So most likely both receptors are downregulating. When that happens, when the 2A and 2C receptors downregulate, dopamine transmission also is elevated. In fact, that's how some atypical...
And this is why I think, like I said, the longer I've been on it, the more of that dopaminergic effect that I feel. It's because those receptors have downregulated, and therefore my dopaminergic system is upregulated. So this is getting a little dense in here. We're going to skip a little bit forward. He talks about neurogenesis, and that's actually one of the amazing things about mushrooms and microdosing mushrooms, is that it does create neurogenesis, similar to an SSRI. So that is definitely one of the benefits. It makes you, a little bit more apt to dealing with hardships in your life. Like if you're going through a tough time, stimulating neurogenesis in the brain can help you get over that tough time. It really does work that way. It makes you more plastic. He talks about different strains here. Then he just has some tips. And then he gets into the microdosing. And we're going to let him talk here.
You're getting a regular amount each time, so you can know which doses work for you. Speaking of doses, let's get into that. Most people use 2 dosing schedules. They either
personally, I just want to say what I do first. I started at 1/10 of a gram every day, and have slowly worked my way up to 300 milligrams or 0.3, 3/10 of a gram, and I do that, like I said, every day. So everybody's going to be different, and every batch of mushrooms is different as well. So I definitely recommend grinding them up too. I think he talked about that in an earlier clip. You can't just eat the whole mushroom because the psilocybin content is not equal throughout the entire mushroom. So you got to grind those up to make sure it's as even as can be, as even as possible.
So usually in the morning, they usually don't know why they're microdosing it. Like Paul Stamets has this 4 on, 3 off schedule, which really doesn't make sense. Stamets is being confused because most likely he's getting the dopaminergic effect. Like you guys know, I like to take amphetamines on a 4 on, 3 off schedule myself, but that's because of the dopaminergic effect. The really great effect from microdosing psilocybin mushrooms is actually the effect on neurogenesis. To get that, you don't have to take 3 days off. In fact, taking 3 days off won't really upregulate those receptors much anyway. So if you do microdose, don't take days off. There's really no reason to do that. If you're trying to get a dopaminergic effect out of psilocybin, there are better drugs for that. But if you're trying to get neurogenesis,
yes, but I'm telling you, from doing this for 9 months, like I said, almost 10, whatever, on, I get a significant dopaminergic effect from taking these every day, like 100%. So, you know, this video is getting kind of long here, and he just talks about fun dosing and heroes dosing. You know, it's really good stuff, honestly, man. He has a lot of really good points. He talks about alcohol and how alcohol is a terrible drug, and honestly, you know, taking a gram of mushrooms instead might be a better idea. You know, at a gram, you're not going to lose your mind, but you'll definitely have a good time. And then, let's see. You know, yeah, that's basically it, man. Rest in peace, Leo. You know, I miss his videos, miss this guy. He had a wealth of knowledge. You know, still I look back on his videos and still learn something new almost every time. So I hope this was helpful to one of you guys out there. If you have any questions on microdosing or, you know, schedules, routines, whatever, put it in the comments, man. I answer every question, always. So to my subscribers, thank you guys. I love y'all. Until the next time, peace out.